Welcome back, friends. So today I would like to show you how to paint a basic portrait in 5 simple steps. In my experience, this is one of the simplest and most efficient ways of going about painting anything for that matter. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Step number 1. Outlines. If you're painting something as complex as a face, it's usually easiest to start with some kind of drawing. When we paint something, we are actually doing 3 things at the same time. We are capturing proportion, capturing value, meaning how light or dark an area is, and we are capturing color. And even for the most experienced painter, doing these 3 things at the same time can be quite difficult. So what most artists do is to split this into 2 separate steps. And the first step, the only thing you focus on is to capture the proportions of what you're about to paint. And this can be done in several ways. You can make an accurate pencil drawing right onto your painting surface. Or you can transfer your drawing to your canvas with a charcoal transfer, leaving you with clean outlines like in my case here. If you're working from a photo, you can even transfer or project the photo onto your canvas. Or you can use a pencil or a brush to make a sketch that only captures the most important parts of what you're about to paint. How you go about doing this step comes down to personal preference, and it honestly is one of the less important aspects of creating a painting. Some artists go even further and dedicate an individual step to each of the 3 tasks. In that case, you start with the drawing and then go on to paint everything in black and white or monochromatically, only focusing on light and shadow. And in the last step, you give everything color by glazing over what you've already established. In my experience, this makes things more complicated than they need to be, and you aren't nearly as flexible when you want to correct areas. The simplest, fastest, and most straightforward method is still the 2-step process in which you start with some kind of drawing or outline and then continue to focus on the painting portion. Step number 2. Start with the difficult things. Now, this might sound a bit counter to intuition, especially to the ears of some professional artists. But I want you to hear me out on this. If we start a portrait by focusing our energy on the most difficult and complex areas of a face, we can make things a whole lot easier for ourselves. And the reason for that is that it's much harder to change or correct a complex shape like an eye or a nose than it is to correct the shape of, let's say, the forehead. One is a simple flat shape, but the nose, for example, is a collection of complex geometrical forms that are intertwined. In my case here, I'm starting by painting the eyes, the lips and the nose, and these are the most complex and difficult areas of the face. So, by painting them first, I'm making sure that I don't run into any problems later in the process. There's little more frustrating than realizing in the middle of the process that the nose you've painted looks too small, or the colors aren't correct and you have to repaint everything. Most artists, myself included, will usually tell you to start with the most basic shapes and forms first and leave all the details for later in the process. And that still holds true. I'm not suggesting to start the painting by painting all the details. Focusing on the most complex areas and painting the details aren't the same thing, and as you will see, I will still come back to repaint the nose and the eyes later in the process, but at that point I will only have to tweak it and not completely repaint or reshape it. Step number 3. Fill it out. While in the second step we focused on the complex areas, this step deals with painting all the simple shapes and forms. We're basically filling out the rest of the face and also the hair. Having taken care of difficult areas of the face, we are now able to be much looser and free while painting. After all, it's not that difficult to correct the shapes of simple elements like the jaw or the cheek. In this step, we focus less on accuracy and more on creating a harmonious overall look for the whole painting. Brushwork and creating interesting skin tones are more important than accuracy here. Capturing the flow of hair, for example, is worth much more than hitting the right color. And the same is true for the skin tones. Capturing the vibrancy of skin and the fact that human skin tends to have different colors depending on where you look is much more important than painting any details. How long you spend on this stage is really something that's up to personal preference. From here on, you can go as simple or as complicated as you want. You can just put patches of color next to each other until it looks loose yet fairly convincing, or you can spend time on rendering individual areas of the face to make them look much more realistic. With this portrait, I decided to keep things quick and simple, but you spend just as much time here as you like or need. Step 4. Paint the background. Painting the background last comes with one huge advantage over painting it early in the process. By painting it last, we are able to create very clean and sharp edges around the figure, and with that create a nice contrast between the two elements. That said, you don't have to leave the background white the whole time in order to achieve this effect. That is just my personal preference because of the way I abstract and destroy areas of the painting, but you can also tint the background at the beginning of the process. That has the benefit of also giving you a better idea of the color relationships and an overall feel of the whole painting. But what's important here is that you leave the final layer of the background to be painted as one of the very last things you paint. You will often hear some old school artists preach to always paint the background first. But that is only a good idea if you are painting very complex backgrounds where gradients or objects continue from one side of the figure to the next. Then it's pretty much essential to paint the background first. You still sacrifice the crisp and clean edges, but it would be much harder to paint the background around the figure, and in some cases, when you have to paint a very smooth gradient, it's almost impossible. But generally speaking, I'm always an advocate of painting the background last. Which leaves us with our final step. Step 5. Make adjustments. Making adjustments where necessary at the end of the process allows us to tie all the components of the painting together. And at this point in the painting process, there will always be areas that aren't quite right yet. Some areas will look too dark or light, and some edges will look too sharp or soft. This is also where you can make some final adjustments to any features of the face that might not be as accurate as you would like them to be. Or what you can do is what I tend to do at this stage: deviate from your reference and start doing what's best for the painting. It's very likely that your painting significantly deviates from your reference material anyway, so you might as well add or change things to your own liking in order to make the painting more interesting or harmonious. This step, in a way, is one of the most important ones. Once you stop comparing your painting to the reference material, you can finally freely judge the painting on its own, based on what it looks like, rather than how close it looks to the reference material. You can change colors, adjust features, or add things. But a good way to tell if your painting is finished is this. If you feel like the changes you are making to the painting don't make it look worse or better, but just different, well, that's usually a good point to set your brush aside and start your next painting. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Thank you all so much for watching. Please hit like, subscribe if you're not already a subscriber, and yeah, have a good one.